Good evening, 49er faithful. Welcome to a fantastic Monday evening episode. We had training camp today. The pads are on, and I am thrilled about that. Very thrilled about my guest today as well. He has been out there at the practices. Very excited to bring him in here. Rohan Chakravarthi, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing good. It's been a fun time. Training camp, obviously very busy. Fifth day of practice, first day of padded practice. Deebo Samuel back. A lot of information has come out over the last couple of days. How are you, man?
I'm good, and I am excited about all of that stuff coming out for the 49ers. It feels like we went from a place of having almost nothing to talk about to having a wealth of topics to dive into because we are excited about Deebo Samuel. No question about that. That is news that all of us have been waiting on. I think there's really only one other piece of 49er news that is bigger than that. Dustin Kohler doing the cruel deed of pointing that out, says the big news we've all been waiting for. Jimmy was traded. No, not the Jimmy trade. Dustin throws shade because Dustin is a Lions fan. So Dustin gets to, sit there in his glass house and throw stones at us over here. I'm excited about that Deebo news there, though. I want to get your quick reaction to this as well. Alan Elizer coming in here, sneakerhead on the channel, asking the question that I think is probably on a lot of 49ers fans' minds at this point in time. He says, Rob Schuh, is it time to buy the Deebo jersey? I'm considering it. And good evening to you and the Niner faithful. Well, good evening to you as well, Alan. I think the key question for me here is, do you expect Deebo to be on the 49ers beyond this extension? Because I think if you're buying a jersey, your hope is that it's there for longer than 3 or 4 years. And I think you've got to hope that the Niners can sign him to one more deal when he turns 30. But I wanted to get your way too early prediction on that. Do you think Deebo is here beyond this contract?
I would say yes. And the reason is one little tidbit in that contract, which I'm sure we'll discuss. That 2026 void year of $7 million. Now, the 49ers could have done this deal without that void year and still been fine with the cap because they could have just prorated it over the 4 years, the signing bonus that is, and been fine with the extension. It would have been probably $1 million more, and they have about $3.3 million in cap space. However, they did lower the cap hits on all the other years by making that $7.9 million void year in 2026. Now, what's the best way to get dead money out of the books? Extending Deebo Samuel's contract, factoring in that void year, and then figuring it out when he is in his age 29 or age 30 season.
I like that prediction. I think that is worth paying attention to. Follow the money. In any deal, follow the money. And there are voidable years in this deal that does push dead cap to those years to try and, amortize out that balloon payment that happens at the beginning, the lump sum up front for Deebo. It's spread out over the first couple of years, but they did incur a significant dead cap hit in that voidable year. And you're right. The way in which you get rid of that is kick the can down the road by extending that player yet again. So, Alan, I think you're hearing a prediction here of, hey, if you're leaning towards getting that Deebo jersey, and I know I was as well, that maybe we can feel a little more secure. I feel like I've got to. I feel like at this point, I've got to put my money where my mouth is and go get myself a Deebo jersey.
Yeah, I agree. Alan, just hit that yes button and go ahead and buy your jersey.
Yes, I'm all there for it. Want to say what's up to all of those that were here in the chat, getting it kicked off for us early. Cameron Blake, Dustin Kohler, Alan Elizer, Raphael 562 Niners, Dan Rostek, John B, 14 Ace Win Do, Carcast, Luke Walsh, Fear Me, Jan Stewart, 91649er, Bomber T, Luke Walsh, worst YouTuber ever. I'm not saying that about Luke Walsh. That's the next name after Luke Walsh there. Jamie Bryant, we got a whole crew that is here and lively. Yes, the sneakerheads are here and alive, but they're also here for you as well. I mean, there's no doubt they like the special guest today, and I can't blame them for that. So let's pick your brain while we have you, because you have been there at camp and you have seen what's been going on, what the vibe has been. So I want to get into this Deebo Samuel deal a little bit. And I want to talk to you about what your opinion is on the deal, what surprised you about it. But the first thing I want to pick your brain about is being there firsthand at camp with regards to Deebo's deal. Did you notice a palpable difference in the atmosphere at camp with Deebo rolling in with a new bag of cash strapped to his hip?
I'll be honest, I was expecting something more grand. Deebo Samuel to have something, something reminiscing like the entire time with the 49ers as he came out. It was just a regular entrance and then he went back to work, and it was a limited day for Deebo. However, there was one moment that I'll say in my day in training camp that I was like, yeah, Deebo's back. And that was the first song of actual practice. You have to know it. It's Super Gremlin, the Kodak Black song that Deebo Samuel walked out to practice in every single time walked out to games in every single time last year, and they blasted it first time. The entire crowd was vibing. The players were vibing. It was a good moment to just symbolize in a way Deebo's back without actually saying Deebo's back on the field.
I like both of those aspects, right? Because the one signifies that it was in fact celebrated, that you got to recognize Deebo, you got to recognize this moment, you have to play something that signifies it. And truth be told, I've been trying to get myself one of those 49ers boomboxes since I saw one of them at Deebo and Trent Williams carrying it out pre-game. Yes, that is fantastic. Love that note being struck prior to practice. But it also gives you a sense of just how important this season is to the 49ers, that Deebo's arrival back at camp, ready to practice, doesn't change the business aspect to this team. It's been talked about how good this roster is. I think the roster is aware of how deep that roster is on this team. And so the team is looking at this season as a potentially special one and treating it as such, treating it as one that needs to be taken seriously. Is that the impression that you're getting?
I agree. And I think there's one part that was back to business, but also fun that fans saw. Trey Lance obviously does his warm-ups every day, and normally he throws the passes to coaches. There are two coaches on the side, one coach deep. He normally throws them to coaches. One coach, though, today, the deep coach, was replaced by a very Deebo Samuel, who was catching passes to begin practice with Trey Lance, then chatting it up with Kyle Shanahan, Brian Fleury, and the coaching staff before rejoining his wide receivers in practice today. So it was a nice sight because, the one play that everybody remembers from last year was the Deebo Samuel Trey Lance connection for 45 yards in the Houston Texans game. And it's nice to see Deebo Samuel. The first thing that you see when he's out there on the field is catching deep passes from Trey Lance.
Giving the people what they want. I love it. It's intentional and as it should be, as it absolutely should be. Well, let's acknowledge the fact that Deebo did get a very big contract done, one that felt inevitable to me once the 49ers did not trade Deebo Samuel during the draft. Seemed to signify to me that they were willing to put pen to paper and make a deal happen at some point, and that they were going to need to concede some things to Deebo's camp. To me, it felt as if what was conceded was making it a 3-year contract instead of a 5-year contract, which the 49ers had historically done for these large deals, and the large amounts of guaranteed money, specifically in a 3-year deal, getting that much guaranteed within it. What surprised you about this deal, and what were you expecting prior to it getting signed?
Yeah, so I'll start with the expectation first. I expected this deal to be signed at the time that it did. I thought Deebo Samuel would be on the field this Monday because of the start of padded practice, the importance to really get the connection with Trey Lance, especially after seeing how it took Brandon Ayuk. When you see the first 2 days of practice with Brandon Ayuk, he struggled in a way, not necessarily like overall, but he struggled to win against the top cornerbacks in Charvarius Ward and Emmanuel Mosley. But then you see on his third day of practice on Saturday, or fourth day, sorry, on Saturday, he torched the entire defense, 5 catches on the day, including passes over those top 2 receivers, including the 50-yard bomb where he mossed Charvarius Ward, kept both feet in the air. And to me, it just told me, it takes just a little bit to get back into the football environment, especially against top-tier talent, but then you get adjusted then. So to me, I thought Deebo Samuel had to be on the field sooner than later so that adjustment period can get over it and Deebo can go back to being Deebo.
That makes a ton of sense. Get him out there, shake the rust off and get him that time with Trey Lance. You need to get your biggest and best offensive weapon back if you're going against one of the most elite defenses in the league, potentially the most elite defense in the league. We'll see.
Exactly.
We'll see when we get it started. I want to talk to you about the way in which we might compare Deebo Samuel's contract with specifically those others represented by his own agent, Mr. Dandy. But I do have a couple of super chats to bring in, and I got to applaud Luke Walsh setting it up from my reference earlier, messaging, talking about how there was the name of a player, the worst YouTuber ever, and then Luke Walsh. But he comes in to clarify that, in fact, Rob Schuh, I am the worst YouTuber ever. Hey, I love people with a little bit of self-deprecating humor. Can't go wrong with that.
Yeah.
All right. Chris Royal, sneakerhead here on the channel, coming in with the super chat. With Deebo having an incentive in his contract that involves rushing yards, I think if healthy all year, we see Deebo coming close to or even exceeding last year's production. This was intriguing because the only incentive in there, the only not likely to be made bonus that was in Deebo's contract was around the rushing totals. And if he gets to 380 rushing yards in a single season or more, it triggers a $650,000 roster bonus. That maxes out at $650 per year. If he doesn't get to 380 rushing yards, but he does have 3 rushing touchdowns, he can then trigger a $150,000 bonus. It caps out at a maximum of $1.95 million over the length of the deal and a maximum of $650,000 per year in the deal. But again, they are triggered by rushing numbers. And this was something that obviously if Deebo didn't want to be a rusher at all, there wouldn't be incentives around that. So I find it fascinating, but it also does force the Niners, if they want to use him as a running back, to pay him just a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about the incentive, right, you talked about the total, 380 yards. Now, to me, first of all, this indicates that the 49ers actually don't necessarily worry about Deebo Samuel and his usage. And Deebo Samuel's camp doesn't either. I don't think that was an issue like Kyle Shanahan indicated, because when you talk about these incentives, right, especially with the way the bill was structured, 49ers and Pragmarate were very, very creative. A ton of bonuses rather than signing bonus money where DK Metcalf got 30 million, Terry McLaurin got 28 million. Deebo Samuel only got 24 whatever it is. I think 24.035 million in total on the signing bonus, but instead got a $9.215 million option bonus, which is fully guaranteed, and then a couple of bonuses which immediately become guaranteed, as well as likely to be made incentives. So they structure the contract well for them, but Deebo ends up getting his money as well. I think he could potentially reach this incentive because just look at last year's production. 59 carries, 365 yards, and what was it, 8 touchdowns. So 380 carries over a 17-game period, whereas he really only got rushes on towards the second half of the season. Mitigate those rushes in one game and instead spread them apart. You have the same efficiency, maybe even more with Trey Lance at the helm, and you might be able to eclipse that 380-yard rushing total. And knowing Deebo Samuel, he wants to win, he wants to play football, and I'm sure he wants to hit this incentive. So I wouldn't be surprised if he hit this incentive at least in one of those 4 seasons.
Nor would I. I actually believe he's likely to hit this one more often than not because of that yardage total. It seems, again, when you spread it out over a 17-game season in years wherein Deebo stays healthy for the vast majority of the year, you would expect him to hit that number. I mean, that just seems like a foregone conclusion on some point. Chris Royal coming back in to say, also, I called him getting signed soon. Yes, Chris, you absolutely did see that one coming. I suspected, as Rohan alluded to, that the 49ers and maybe Deebo's camp as well saw this Monday as a soft deadline for trying to get the deal done so that Deebo could be back for that first padded practice. It felt like a logical target for everyone to have in mind, but a relief nonetheless, because I can imagine, Rohan, that the environment would have been different if this dragged on through the padded practices into the remainder of training camp.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about the padded practices, right, I think that these are so important because the way that Kyle Shanahan schemes it, right, So day one, similar to how the unpadded went, day one is a ramp up day. You don't do much when day two is the day that you really get acclimated. And so you don't want a guy getting his first action on day two when the 49ers are really pushing the throttle. You saw it last week, right? Trey Lance threw 6 of 14 on day two, but a variety of deep passes. And even with those 6 of 14, that 6 of 14 number, 3 of those passes, as I mentioned on stream, were very accurate passes deep down the field. A 35-yard play, a 40-yard play, and a 17-yard play, which just were good plays by the defense, and the receivers just couldn't corral them in. That's just how it went. But tomorrow, I'm expecting a huge ramp up, especially after the red zone practice or red zone install is complete. And you might see a full version of the 49ers offense, including maybe a move the ball period as well.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, as they ramp it up, as this gets more intense, it just means that we have more and more to pay attention to. When you look at Deebo's contract, just in putting a bow on that one before we move on to talk about what it was like in camp with the pads on, were you shocked that the 49ers did agree to a 3-year deal that could put Deebo back in the driver's seat? I mean, a lot of these extensions are done with 1 year remaining on a contract. And so this deal goes through until Deebo is 30 years old. If he starts to negotiate it with 1 year remaining, he will be negotiating one more big contract before the age of 30. Were you shocked that the 49ers allowed that to happen in the length of this deal compared to those other 5-year deals they gave to Kittle and Warner, and you would think are going to give to Bosa?
I was actually surprised in the opposite way. I wasn't surprised about the 3-year deal. I was surprised Deebo Samuel agreed to a deal that was lower in average annual value on the base than DK Metcalf and lower in guaranteed money than DK Metcalf. So he was the third ranked receiver of the 4, including McLaurin, in average annual value. He was the second receiver in guaranteed money, the most important metric. And he was also, I believe, the third receiver in signing bonus, ranking just ahead of A.J. Brown. And guaranteed at signing, though, he did get $41 million, which I believe eclipsed the other numbers, because I know Metcalf got 31 and the other receivers were in that 31 to 40 range. But I was surprised that given that Deebo Samuel was the 4th receiver to be signed, I thought that was the inevitable part. But I thought his average annual value would be bumped up, but also his guaranteed money would be bumped up. We had heard reports that it had neared 70 million, which would essentially mean 3 guaranteed years as opposed to 2 guaranteed years. Instead, it's that 58 million, 12 whole million less. And so Deebo Samuel's contract, in my opinion, the 49ers did a great job. I'm not going to say a team-friendly deal because it's a heck of a lot of money.
Right.
But it is a good job by the 49ers front office to get this deal done. And I mean, this is a conspiracy in a way, but I personally just believe Deebo wanted this deal done to get on the field after how long this lasted, this entire process.
It certainly doesn't feel like Deebo won this deal. It doesn't feel like the Niners won this deal. It actually feels like a bit of a compromise when you look at the totality of it, which feels sort of rare in today's society at all, let alone the NFL. We got a super chat to bring in, then we're going to transition to talking about the fact that pads came on today. But first, we're bringing in Pedro Gonzalez talking about, I'm glad this is behind us. Now on to figuring out the offensive line. From what I understand, they're having a rough time protecting Trey. We are going to talk about the offensive line. This feels like an ideal time to transition because Pedro is bringing it up for us. I want to ask your firsthand, acknowledgement, your firsthand observation of what has this rotation looked like so far, and have there been surprises for you along that offensive line? And to Pedro's point, are they having a rough time in protecting Trey so far?
Yeah. So first, talking about the surprises, I was very surprised that Spencer Burford just ended up being that starting right guard. And not only that, I'm surprised he hasn't gotten any push at all at right guard. You see the competition at center between Daniel Brunskill and you see it between Jake Brendel. But there's a guy, Jalen Moore, who took all of the first team OTA and minicamp snaps, and from what I heard behind the scenes, was looking pretty promising too. And so that's interesting that he hasn't seen a single right guard snap the entire time. It's been a combination of Nick Sakel, Keaton Sutherland, even some Colton McKivitz thrown in the action as well. So that's the interesting thing, because I don't think any of those three are in a position to push Burford to start there. And so that's the main kind of surprise to me. Now, as for the yeah, go ahead real quick.
I was just going to ask, what do you attribute that to? Do you think that Moore, because I heard similar things, that Moore did have those reps at right guard in OTAs and minicamp. Haven't seen that now. Do you think that speaks to his need at the tackle position?
I think you nail it right on the head right there. I think it's just because both Trent Williams and Mike McGlinchey have been limited, if they are practicing. Jalen Moore, there's just a necessity at tackle right now. And I think they want Jalen Moore to play there because, if I'm being bluntly honest, the rest of the tackles have looked really poorly so far in camp. There's only been one good tackle out of the 5 potential prospects. And that is Sam Schluter. And he's looked fine at backup left tackle. But Justin Skule has had a rough camp. Alfredo Gutierrez looks like he doesn't belong in an NFL field. And then the guy we just mentioned, Colton McKivitz, he's looked fine at times at right tackle, but he struggled at left tackle. And then Jalen Moore himself he just doesn't seem like a true tackle. I personally, alongside my co-host Marco Martinez, believe he's a guard. I think that he profiles better as a guard, but because there's a lack of availability from the top tackles who practice in probably a third, if not less, of the scrimmage portion so far, he's just needed at tackle. So I think he's saved. He's guaranteed in a way a roster spot because of his flexibility, but he did in a way get pushed out of the position because of a lack of availability elsewhere.
It would seem that it's an obvious lock at left tackle. Need not even discuss that. When you talk about right tackle, it would seem, again, if McGlinchey is healthy, a lock at right tackle. From what you have seen to this point, what does your gut tell you about who starts right tackle week 1? Is it McGlinchey? Does he look healthy enough out there to be the starter for week 1?
I actually think McGlinchey looks really good so far. He had a rough, today, he had a rough Saturday. Saturday was his first day back, and it's kind of tough when you're going back from an injury, your first day back, and you see number 97 line up across from you. You don't get a single chip. You don't get a one-on-one. They're just saying, have at it. Hopefully you don't get screwed. So on Saturday, Mike McGlinchey got worked a little bit by Nick Bosa. Bosa got a sack on him, and then McGlinchey committed a holding penalty where he essentially had to hold Bosa to the ground, and Bosa was like, come on, man. But overall, like, McGlinchey still had a good rep against Bosa on Saturday, but today he looked pretty damn good, I'll be honest. Like, when we talk about the entirety of it, he gave up one sack to Bosa, or one pressure. I won't say sack. It's one pressure to Bosa where Bosa faked outside, cut inside, and beat him. But overall, against Nick Bosa on the other reps, McGlinchey held his ground today. And while we heard reports about the offensive line looking poor, in the limited time that the starters were out there, there were maybe 2 to 3 to maybe 4 clean pockets where the quarterback was able to have time, 3, 4, 5 seconds. It's just at times the receivers couldn't get open from the great coverage of the secondary, forcing an incompletion or a scramble outside of the pocket, or maybe a delayed sack after that.
Has the vast majority of the pressure that the offensive line has allowed, has that been through the center of the line? Because that seems to be the positions we would be most naturally worried about at this point.
So it's interesting when we talk about the offensive line. I think every one of the starters has had a couple of good reps. It's just the issue with the offensive line right now is they're not all consistently having the same good rep. One of them consistently gets beat. And so while the others are holding their ground, one of them is getting beat. A good example that comes to mind, Trent Williams locked down the left side. Daniel Brunskill actually had a good rep on Kerry Hyder on a play, but Kevin Givens beat Aaron Banks one-on-one on the left side, ended up getting a sack, or ended up disrupting Trey Lance, forcing him to move out of the pocket and killing the play pretty much. For that play, Trey Lance had to scramble out, and that was pretty much the end of the play. But overall, I think it's the consistency with the offensive line. They just haven't been able to mesh with each other, and it's attributed to two reasons, I'd say. One is the lack of availability of the top tackles. McGlinchey and Williams just haven't been in the mix as much as I'd expect them to be so far. And then the center is the second one. You're continuously switching centers, and the centers have a difference in style in a way in how they block. So I was talking with Brad Graham earlier today, and he noticed how Daniel Brunskill, he blocks in a way from a deeper stance. He gives up a couple of yards initially, but is able to anchor down and hold. But in that causes the quarterback in a way to be aware that Brunskill is deeper down in his stance than the other centers would be. Whereas Brunskill would get, Brendel would get beat or hold at the line of scrimmage itself. So it's a complete difference for the quarterback, but also for the other offensive linemen who feel that they have protection in one end and don't. So to me, I feel like the 49ers should find a way to solve this, figure out who their guy is, and have them get acclimated with the rest of the unit, because the interior offensive line is struggling in a way because of a result of that issue, because there isn't necessarily a relationship built yet between any of the new guys, because there's 3 new starters now on the interior offensive line.
Lack of cohesion is such a detriment to the success of an offensive line, right? They are a unit that must move as one. They must be one complete unit and not 5 disjointed individuals operating separately. Therefore, finding out who that player is to anchor the center position and allowing this unit to play together for the maximum amount of time seems extremely important. I want to bring in a couple of comments / questions about this. John B., sneakerhead here on the channel, says, Rob, a word I'm hearing is that Banks has been one of the best offensive linemen in camp so far. And then you hear a separate comment coming in from Steve saying, I heard Banks is good and then bad. So what has your observation been? Are you with John here that primarily we have seen good things from Banks? Is it a bit of good mixed in with some bad, as one might expect from a young player gaining that starting role? What's the firsthand observation that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think on Thursday or Friday, I tweeted out two practices in, Aaron Banks has been the best 49ers offensive lineman out there. And this, remember, is without McGlinchey and Williams. This was when you had the center rotation and then Burford. Burford has had his fair share of struggles at times. I think he's the one question mark opposite of center right now. I think Banks has looked fairly good. Today was a down day for Banks. He did give up a couple of pressures to Kevin Givens in one-on-ones, but overall, I think Banks has been one of the more consistent 49er offensive linemen. He's had his ups and downs as well, but I think he's been better than Spencer Burford so far, definitely better than whatever has been at center so far, and I think he also has been solid in the run game. There was one run in mind specifically today. 49ers ran outside zone to the left, and obviously you've got a Mahler and Trent Williams there, but the other guy, Aaron Banks, made sure that there was really nobody on the edge. It was a good 10-yard run to the outside today, and there was nobody just there because Banks had gotten to the second level. So today, it's been a pretty good day when you run to the outside. The more important question is, how does the interior run get there? And I think that'll take a couple of days, but the outside run was good today, and Banks overall has been one of the better ones. I don't know if it's saying much given the state of our offensive line, but I think Banks has been the 3rd best offensive lineman behind the 2 tackles.
And hey, I'll take the positive comments from Trent Williams around Banks as well, talking about the difficulty of not just losing weight, but losing weight while gaining muscle. Exactly. That is a very tricky thing to do. Reshaping your body certainly would help in locking down that left guard position. I'll take Trent Williams at his word whenever he heaps praise on anybody, because he just seems to be the type of dude who tells it like he sees it, doesn't blow smoke. And so it would seem that the biggest question mark that you're indicating and is true with my own observations is that center position. And it seems until we have an answer of, is it Jake Brendel or is it Daniel Brunskill who locks down that position, then the right guard spot is still going to be in flux until we have locked down that center position. Do you have a favorite at this point in time? Who did you think it was going to be going in, and have you changed that belief from what you've seen so far?
You read my mind in a way, because at first I did think it was going to be Jake Brendel. I thought
Me too.
I thought the connection with Trey Lance would serve him well, especially because they've been together for the entirety of this offseason and last offseason. However, I don't know necessarily that that's the case anymore. Daniel Brunskill struggled on Wednesday and Thursday, specifically with his snapping. He had a couple of low snaps and also a couple of poor reps as well. However, Daniel Brunskill turned it up on Saturday when I was watching. He had one of the better days, took a majority of the first team reps despite Brendel starting. So I'll clear one thing up. Brendel has started every single day, but there has been a constant rotation, and Brunskill had his best day on Saturday, taking the majority of the first team reps. That leaned me towards Brunskill, especially because I thought the 49ers want him to start at center after giving Brendel most of the reps. However, you also saw Brunskill work with Lance after practice on snapping, and that was an interesting tidbit as well. However, looking at today, they split the reps evenly. So right now, I don't think there is a definitive favorite in the building, although I personally believe the 49ers want Brunskill to win the job. At the moment, I will lean towards Brunskill, but I am more 50-50 than I was on Saturday after watching practice.
That's interesting that it is getting a closer battle, and the coin flip at this point seems like one that we've got to keep our eyes on. You certainly had Matt Mayoko, Jennifer Lee Chan mentioning the fact that Daniel Brunskill is coming back from a little bit of soreness in that knee. You wonder if it weren't for that lingering knee issue, if he maybe would be getting more of these first team reps. So as this training camp progresses, something to keep our eyes on to see if it was the injury hampering Daniel Brunskill from grabbing that first string position, or whether it truly is a 50-50 coin flip at this point. CT Law, sneakerhead here on the channel, brings in this next super chat here, which will transition us to the topic that I think everyone wants at least some update on, and that is Trey Lance's progress throughout these training camp practices from start to finish there. And so the question here comes from someone who is a supporter of Jimmy Garoppolo. CT Law saying, you know already, I'm Jimmy all the way. That ship has sailed, but sorry, Trey is not the answer. The kid is struggling. Just look, compared to Joe Burr, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, etc. You saw it day one. So obviously referencing Joe Burrows, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes in that. I think it's probably a little bit premature to say that he isn't one of those guys, considering we've only seen him in game action twice, right? Two and a half times, technically. And it hasn't even gotten to the preseason at this point. We're just talking about training camp practices where it's okay to struggle. It doesn't count in the win-loss column. But I want to get your take on this exact comment because you have seen it with your own two eyes. Are you buying into this type of pessimism that CT Law is bringing to the table? Are you beginning to wonder if this drags on as you've seen it play out currently, would the Niners consider keeping Jimmy Garoppolo around? Like, what are your firsthand observations about Trey?
Yeah, and before I continue, I want to actually bring up one interesting point because people talk about struggles, especially in training camp. Justin Herbert in this training camp, first 2 days, his stats, 8 of 20. So that is something interesting to point out. That's a top 10 quarterback. Some people have him in the top 5. It's just the just getting back into football kind of period. And for me, for Trey Lance, I'm definitely on the opposite. I'm on the more optimistic way. And that's just because of what I've seen. What people hear and what people think about are the stats. Trey Lance,
Right.
6 of 14 passing, 3 of 9 passing. Today, 5 of 11 passing. Wow, has he not had a period of time where he's thrown over 60% of his passes? But then when you watch and understand why those passes are like that, it's very important to include context. And that's what I've been trying to do during my live streams, trying to include context with why Lance is throwing how he's throwing and where those throws are going. Let's start off with Thursday, right? Real quick. 6 of 14. I mentioned earlier how 3 of those throws were deep passes. One was to Brandon Ayuk. Emmanuel Mosley had pinned him on the sideline 35 yards deep, and as Ayuk tried to corral the ball down, which was a good ball from Trey Lance, Mosley just pinned it out as Ayuk tried to keep both feet out, swatting the ball out. The second one was a 40-yard bomb from Jawan Jennings on the right sideline. As Jennings went to get the ball, he tried to corral it, couldn't corral it, and then Charvarius Ward knocked it out. And the third one was the Hufanga PBU that I talked about, where it was good for Ray McLeod. Hufanga just made a great play on the ball. and burst through and deflected it before it hit McLeod in the hands. So overall, there have been accurate throws. It's just the defense has sometimes gotten the better of the offense on those plays. We can talk about today as well. 5 of 11, but in my opinion, Trey Lance had one of his strongest days today overall, because one of those throws was a drop to Jawan Jennings in the end zone. Another one was a throwaway due to Kevin Gibbons beating Aaron Banks, forcing Lance to just quickly throw the ball away, which a lot of people disliked about Jimmy Garoppolo because he wouldn't throw the ball away. And then the third throw was a play. Lance did have the interception, right? We don't sugarcoat it. I don't like to sugarcoat it really. But on the third throw as well, it was a nice ball. And Lance, it was not a nice ball, but Lance, it was the first play of the red zone period. And the offensive line just forgot how to, what they were doing in a way. The center snapped the ball. None of the offensive linemen moved. All 4 of the defensive linemen went towards Lance. So Lance had to really quickly throw a 50-50 ball to Malik Turner. That was one of the plays. So it was just like the offensive linemen just not on the same page there. And overall, if you take those 3 plays away, what is he? 8 of 11. That's pretty good. And I'm not going to say he threw 8 of 11 because he didn't. But there is real context behind Lance's poor throws and Lance's incompletions, but there's also poor throws as well.
Context is very important. If you're attempting to come up with an insightful opinion, you need proper context in order to do so. If you were strictly speaking about Lance's accuracy to this point, how would you describe it?
He's been great downfield, and he struggled a little bit in the intermediate range. I think the 49ers are going to start airing the ball out more because that's Lance's strong suit right now. He's been one of the more accurate deep passers. I think overall, statistically, he's 6 of 12, and I just mentioned 3 of the deep throws as to why they were incompletions. So he's been very good down the field. Over the middle, though, he struggled. That's where a couple of his interceptions have come, where he's thrown it straight to a defender and thrown it behind. The main thing with Lance so far, he's done one of 2 things on incompletions. He's thrown it behind receivers, which is a little concerning, or on out routes, he's thrown it just a little too in front of receivers, trying to hit them with defenders trailing. Those are the 2 ways. Lance currently definitely struggles the most with his intermediate throws.
Well, I mean, that was certainly an area of proficiency for Jimmy Garoppolo. And so that will be a pretty distinct difference in the transition from one to the other. Do you get a sense that the offensive system specifically that we're going to see, it will be very similar to what we've witnessed over the past 4 years? Or do you anticipate somewhat of an evolution to this offense? Will it be noticeable enough that the average fan will say to themselves, this is notably different than it was before?
I think yes and no. And the way that I say it, I don't think the playbook will change much. At least what I've seen initially is the playbook isn't really that different. The only thing is the reads are going to change because Lance's tendencies are different, like you said, than Jimmy Garoppolo's tendencies. You just perfectly pointed it out. Where is Jimmy Garoppolo most comfortable with? The intermediate range, where he continuously is able to fit throws into tight windows in that range, and he's able to make throws. He's one of the better passers in the intermediate range in the NFL at times. Lance, however, that's not necessarily his strong suit. It's the deep range where Garoppolo doesn't necessarily target that area. And I know there's a compilation out there of Brandon Ayuk consistently getting open on a deep route. Those throws are throws that Trey Lance will now hit. So the offense will look to the common eye completely different because I personally think you're going to stretch the field more, but I don't think it's a philosophical change. I just think it's a change in the tendency of the quarterback on the reads.
That's a great call out, that it is purely execution within the same offensive scheme, but different choices, different reads could have a very different result. Going to bring in Fosse's super chat here before bringing us back to this topic. This one is a quick one. Who's your starting offensive line week 1? I mean, I'll say that I've said it was, I was keeping the chalk prediction wherein it was most likely to land that position from the outset. So I had obviously left tackle Trent Williams locked in, Aaron Banks at left guard, Daniel Brunskill at right guard. I had Jake Brendel in there at center and Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. I believe that's starting to shift. And if we continue to see what we have, I'll make a change in my prediction, but I'm keeping it there for right now. Who do you have as the starting five to begin the season?
I was like you. I had the first, well, going into camp, I didn't know right guard, but looking right now, I would say that it's Trent Williams for sure, Aaron Banks for sure. The battle between Jake Brendel and Daniel Brunskill, how I believe the 49ers wanted to go through is Brunskill at center, Burford at right guard, and then McGlinchey at right tackle. That's how I believe they want it, just based on how they've played the two. However, I would not be surprised if Brendel ends up winning the job. Currently, though, just based on what I've seen on the field, Brunskill is the favorite.
That makes sense. And that's what I'm starting to see in the shift myself as well. It looks like CT Law is bringing us back to the Trey Lance topic. Obviously got a little bit of doubt there. CT Law saying problem is Trey doesn't get to have a rookie year. You know, if Jimmy stays 95%, you make the postseason. He's now gone. You don't make the postseason after his relief. Someone is getting fired. Hope Grant. Well, CT Law making his predictions there. I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that this team without Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't make the playoffs. I see this roster as, yes, it is built to where if Jimmy were the quarterback, I have to agree with CT Law in that respect. If Jimmy Garoppolo were the quarterback of this team, I do believe it would be within all likelihood that the 49ers make the playoffs. Where I differ is I still view that as the most likely outcome for a 49ers team with this roster championed by Trey Lance as the quarterback. I still see a high likelihood of this team being 11-6, making the playoffs. And there's a high chance in my book of Trey Lance and his trajectory continuing upward throughout the season, such that when we get to the playoffs with Trey, we may actually have a better chance of a deep run in those playoffs than we would have with Jimmy Garoppolo and his ceiling at that point. So that's a lot of speculation on my part, but how are you currently seeing this? How would you answer CT Law's comment here?
I think you hit it on perfectly again. When you talk about the reason why the 49ers adjusted their quarterback plans in 2021, trading 3 first-round picks, some significant capital to acquire the 3rd overall pick, it was because they realized they couldn't get over the hump. The hump being reaching and winning the Super Bowl. Jimmy Garoppolo did well in his 49ers tenure, obviously bringing the 49ers to an NFC championship twice and a Super Bowl once. However, the reason that the 49ers went a different direction is because they believe Trey Lance's traits can take them to that Super Bowl caliber level. And when you talk about Trey Lance, yes, he might struggle initially. We've seen a couple of the reports, and I've seen it myself, where Trey Lance has obviously he's getting acclimated to the NFL environment. But Kyle Shanahan put it perfectly. Trey Lance does not need to be a superhero over the first 8 weeks of the season. The defense is an elite level defense if we've seen it with this 49ers offense going against it. The weapons on this team are pretty damn good. And the outside zone running, if anything, is also pretty consistent as well. It's going to be good with McGlinchey and Williams on the outside. I think those factors in itself can carry the 49ers alongside with adequate quarterback performance from Lance to a playoff berth. When you remember back in 2019, when the 49ers started the year 8-1, how many passing yards did Jimmy Garoppolo throw per game? It wasn't 275 yards. It was 228 yards, and he had a touchdown interception ratio of 14-8. Fairly meager in my opinion. And so to me, I think the 49ers might be a little more aggressive offensively with Trey Lance. However, I don't think they need to elite quarterback play. They've proven it over the last couple of years to reach where they are, but they do need a guy of Trey Lance's caliber to push them over the top.
I was in lockstep with Kyle Shanahan when he said that, and I think you astutely bring that up here, that this team could mirror what the 2019 team did at the beginning of the season in not relying upon the quarterback and still winning a substantial number of those games. I think that I have predicted the 49ers end up at the midseason break at 4-4. And so I'm not predicting a great start by this team, but I acknowledge that it is absolutely a plausible outcome for this team, in particular with this defense, with an improved special teams, with a phenomenal run game, you could see a situation wherein you get those 2019 vibes. I do want to bring in Chris Royals super chat here. This is in response to CT Laws that you see on the screen right here, saying that, hey, it ain't 95%. It's not 95%. You had 4 full years with Jimmy Garoppolo, and only 2 of those were healthy, so more like a 50-50. That is fair to point out there. Absolutely fair to point out there. CT Law coming back in says, better question. If Trey fails, where are we? I'm just not feeling it. Time will tell. You said 11-6. I say 8-8. Nail biter. I mean, hey, 9-7, you could still make the playoffs. I do think that's a fair question. What if Trey fails? We are SOL at that point because the 49ers have not had a backup quarterback beyond Nate Sudfeld. So you're looking at a situation where it's Trey Lance or bust. I do think that's a strategic move by the 49ers in parting ways with Jimmy Garoppolo, not having him on this roster, incurring some risk in doing that, but it feels like a very intentional strategy of this is Trey Lance's team. We've got to make it very clear to the rest of the league as well as our own roster that it's Trey Lance's team. Yes, that comes with inherent risk, but it feels worthwhile to me.
Yeah, and I think that you nail it properly, right? In that, regardless, right? 11-6, 8-8. It's in a way super unpredictable to just say what the schedule will end up being. But overall, I just think, like, while we don't know what Trey Lance is, as I said in my earlier comment to CT, I just think that track record with Shanahan, especially looking back at 2019 when you essentially had a quarterback coming back from an ACL injury in Jimmy Garoppolo, who didn't get acclimated with the NFL offense with the new pieces like Deebo Samuel very early. I still think that there is a sustainable formula to winning games, and that's the elements that I pointed out a little earlier.
I'm with you on that. There are a couple of players that I want to get to that I'm specifically just interested in your observations about them. I have heard good musings about these individuals at camp so far. Brandon Ayuk, this is one wherein I'm looking to this season because of his partnering with Trey Lance in the offseason, spending a bunch of time together. The guys look like freaking BFFs off the field, and that has to account for something as far as on-field chemistry goes. What have you seen from Brandon Ayuk from the start of training camp until now? What's your impression been?
So I said this a little earlier about Ayuk's struggles initially. I thought Ayuk struggled a little bit in the very beginning of training camp, Wednesday and Thursday, to be specific, of last week, where it's not that he struggled. It's just he couldn't necessarily win as much against Ward and Mosley, but he won and dominated against all the other guys. And really, in my opinion, winning against cornerback ones, whereas winning against everybody else, is the true separator between a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2 in today's NFL. And so to me, I wanted to see Brandon Ayuk consistently win against the top guys to kind of put himself in that wide receiver 1 caliber type of player. And that's what he did on Saturday. And that's what he did today. Saturday, he was the best player on the field, regardless of position. He was the best player. He made Trey Lance look better. And really, it's really nice to see the connection, right? You talk about the bromance, and the bromance is finally starting to get on the field. Trey Lance is by far most comfortable when targeting Brandon Ayuk. He seems to throw the most, in a way, balls that require the most touch, balls that require the most instinct. When he's targeting Brandon Ayuk, it's tougher throws, but he's also nailing it properly. One underrated throw that I'll mention on Saturday to end practice after throwing an interception to Fred Warner, Trey Lance found Brandon Ayuk on a 20-yard route coming from the right sideline in. Dante Johnson had inside leverage on Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk needed the ball needed to be on Ayuk's left shoulder. Now, if you're a quarterback and a receiver's running in, you throw that ball to the inside. However, Lance understood where Ayuk was, understood the cornerback's leverage, hit Ayuk on the left shoulder. Ayuk jumped up, made the catch, and it was a great way to end practice. So you could definitely see the relationship coming through. And there are serious claims to be made that Ayuk could lead the 49ers in receiving this year. I don't personally believe that it could be the case, but I could definitely understand why after seeing the connection over the first couple of days.
I have made that bold prediction myself. Jack Hammer has laughed at me and claimed that there's no way he unseats Deebo Samuel in that regard. But I think that connection is very real. I just want to call in Damian poo-pooing it, saying men can't be BFFs. Don't limit yourself like that, man. Men can be BFFs. Men can be whatever the heck they want just because it's a slightly effeminate term. Don't allow that to limit you. I've got a BFF. I'm proud to admit it. I have no problem saying I've got a best friend forever. Give me a term. I will embrace it. I don't need that toxic masculinity. I'm very secure in being BFFs with people out there. Just had to throw that out there. All right, so Brandon Ayuk trending upward. This one is an acquisition in the offseason, seems to be bearing early fruit. Charvarius Ward is getting mentioned all over the place out there for that defense, pass breakups, you name it. What has been your impression so far a week into camp?
I would definitely not have expected to say this, but the cornerback, the newly signed $14 million a year cornerback, is the best player for the 49ers, regardless of field. He has been the best player, and he's been exactly as advertised. He's got interceptions, pass breakups. The first day, he wasn't even targeted. The 49ers didn't even want to throw his way. The second day, Trey Lance said, all right, let's test the waters. 5 targets, not only Lance, but all the quarterbacks said, let's test the waters. 5 targets, only 1 completion.
Ouch.
2 pass breakups and 2 other incompletions where Ward was still just beautifully on coverage. He has been as advertised. And the biggest thing to me that has stood out, the 49ers have had 11 interceptions so far in training camp. That matches their total of the entirety of last year's training camp, and in only half the time. And Ward has been at the forefront of it. Ward is the primary reason I think the 49ers are going to be a defense that might have turnovers in 2022. It's not necessarily in Ward's track record, but he's got the ability for it. And if it's thrown his way, guys like Ward have been able to make the play. So far, he's the best player on the field for the 49ers regardless of offense or defense. And I think that is going to continue, which is why I'm so excited to see him line up against Mr. 19 Problems, Deebo Samuel.
Yes, that is going to be fantastic. TC 49er coming in saying worth every penny. It certainly feels that way to this point. The 49ers have struggled to generate those turnovers on defense for a team that has a great pass rush. I find that to be slightly perplexing. Do you think this is a year wherein that turns around, wherein the 49ers didn't go out and specifically bring in a ball hawk, quote unquote, but do you see this as a season wherein the 49ers climb the ranks in their turnover rates on defense?
I think so. I personally do think so. And that's just because last year's interception rate was so minimally low. And I mean, when you look at the cornerbacks on the field, you expect you expect the interception numbers, at least, that the cornerbacks provided last year. The 49ers, surprisingly, have been one of the better teams at creating fumbles. You've got Mr. Peanut Punch Fred Warner, who I think would have created a fumble earlier on a George Kittle drop if they were continuing play. But Fred Warner, he obviously has that ability. But the one thing they've lacked so far is interceptions, even dating back to the Richard Sherman times based on the scheme they played. The 49ers are going to be a lot more aggressive defensively in 2022. You've seen a lot more press man corner, and that might mean you give up a couple of plays. But that also means that you're going to have to test cornerbacks as a member of an opposing offense, and that means there's more opportunity for these interceptions to come in place. So far, 49ers defense looking even better as advertised, and that was a top 5 defense last year.
Man, I'm telling you, I see this as a top 3 defense. I've been saying it for a long time. I do believe there will be a little bit of an uptick in those turnovers. I think there will be a strong uptick in the number of sacks. I predicted the 49ers coming out on top with the sack title at the end of the year. All right, this one is talking a little bit about observations. There are going to be some quick hitting questions that I've got here for you. And the first couple are about the difference between expectation and reality. So coming into camp, what's one player who has disappointed that you either thought they were going to be good, you thought they were going to be capable, and the reality hasn't matched up to that? Who's someone that your observations of so far have been less than stellar?
Jeff Wilson Jr. I expected him to potentially be in the running for running back number 4, although I prefer Jordan Mason. He has just not been he's been running back number 6 so far, behind even JaMychal Hasty. Mason had a great day today. Wilson Jr. just looks a step slower. His vision doesn't seem to be as great, although I didn't see him as much with pads on today, so I'll wait for that. But he's one guy. The other guy I'd say is Ambry Thomas. He's had an up and down camp, and the reason is not necessarily all because of Thomas's play, but is because of the emergence of the guy opposite of him, who is Deommodore Lenoir. I'll talk about him a little later, but Thomas so far up and down. He's played a lot of soft coverage, which has forced a lot of catches to be allowed. But in the time that he's played, which I expect him to be man coverage, press man coverage, that is, he's had a holding penalty. He's also had a really good rep against Danny Gray. But so that's just encapsulating the up and down. So to me, I don't know yet, but yeah.
I've got to say, to me, that it's just a sigh of relief that the 49ers didn't do what they have done in the past and say Ambry Thomas was coming on at the end of the year. So we're just going to lock him in as another starting cornerback and move forward as if it will be a natural progression from end of year 1 into year 2. The sophomore slump is a very real thing within the NFL. A lot of these players who think they understood whatever that missing piece was for themselves towards the end of their first year, they come in a little bit overconfident coming into year 2, maybe don't work as hard, and they find out that that's not the reality of the NFL, that you have to be at the top of your game consistently in order to compete at that level. Do you view this as worrisome, or much like his slow start last year, is it something you would expect him to recover from as this season wears on?
I don't view it as worrisome so far. I personally think he just needs to be thrown in the fire, especially as a press man corner. I don't think he excels with his traits as a corner that plays off. I think Lenoir might be a corner that plays better off. He isn't one of them, especially because his zone instinct isn't really as great as his man instinct. So he doesn't know when to close on a receiver necessarily as much. And so when he's put out in space, I don't think he's as great. I think he needs to be thrown in the fire as a man press corner where he gets over the grabbiness, the holding penalties, because the rep that he had against the receiver, Danny Gray, speedy receiver on a comeback route, was beautiful. I think if he can continue that, he has optimism, but that's one thing.
Good to know. And yes, it is what it is, coming in and saying what I was essentially alluding to there. Ambry giving me Witherspoon vibes. What I'm saying is I'm glad the 49ers didn't pursue the same strategy they used with Witherspoon in basically penciling him in as a starter. For those of you that are watching, if you are enjoying the program, hit that like button. We're wrapping up this thing in a few more minutes. Make sure to hit that on the way out. Now I want to flip the script and say, for most disappointing player, who's intrigued you more than you anticipated that they would at this point? Who has been a pleasant surprise to this point in training camp?
So we talked about Deommodore Lenoir, so I won't mention him again. And I'm going to go with a different position. Strong safety. Talanoa Hufanga. That's the guy who everybody had a question about because my guy, Jaquiski Tartt, departed in free agency. The 49ers didn't want him back. People were like, is Hufanga a 5th-round pick really going to be capable to start? And so far, he's looked the part. He has the work ethic. Every morning, I get out there at 9 a.m. just to wait for the 9:40 moment, 45 minutes before training camp, to see Talanoa Hufanga as the first player out on the field. Man. He's been the first player out on the field for the last 2 years, and he has that type of work ethic, and his play also backs it up. He had a nice PBU that I mentioned earlier on Ray McLeod. His speed in short distance is actually not as bad as people expect. It's pretty solid. And then the last part about Talanoa Hufanga that I want to mention, one-on-ones. Today, they finally debuted one-on-ones. He had 2 reps. One was a pass breakup, where he covered the tight end well, and then he was on Ross Dwelley, the one that I watched very closely. He was step in step with Dwelley, then he undercut the route and intercepted the pass. So great 2 reps from Talanoa Hufanga. I think in the role that the 49ers are going to plan to use him in, he's going to be a pretty solid contributor so far.
That's fantastic to hear, because that is absolutely one of those positional battles that we've got our eye on throughout this camp. And that is the clip that I want to end us on in talking specifically about some of those positional battles. And you answered that one right there. I mean, I would interpret that to mean that we're looking at most likely Talanoa Hufanga landing that strong safety position. There's nothing I have heard other than a couple of flashes from Tavarius Moore that he has regained some of that athleticism, but nothing that leads me to believe he's genuinely competing for that strong safety spot. Next one I have my eye on there on defense would be the nickel cornerback position. Does this feel like as clear cut of, hey, it's Darqueze Dennard's position unless he screws it up? Or is this a true camp battle wherein anyone could take it? Sam Womack could jump in and grab that position. Could be Darqueze Dennard. Could be a dark horse candidate. How do you see the nickel spot coming out so far?
Yeah, so I definitely have personal thoughts on the nickel spot as well as what I've seen. I personally don't believe Darqueze Dennard is that guy, even though he's taken all the first team reps at slot corner, just because they have so many players, and Dennard is a guy who they can cut, maybe even bring back. But I just don't view him as one of those valuable pieces right now. But the 49ers have proved me wrong so far. Darqueze Dennard has played almost entirely every first team snap in the slot. The only time that changed was when he was relegated to second team on Saturday. And you know who the first team slot guy was? Dante Johnson.
Dante
freaking Johnson got all the first team snaps, or a majority of them, on Saturday. But Dennard was back out there today. He was a starter in the slot, and Womack was the second team guy again after being bumped to third team because of the Johnson news.
Okay, here's the question as I try to get rid of this spam that just flooded the hell out of the chat there. The question is, does the Barnacle make it onto this team? This is a stacked roster. Does Dante Johnson and his value at being able to play any of the positions in the secondary, does that assure him a roster spot, or do the Niners view him as someone that they could cut and bring back, and therefore, much like Darqueze Dennard, maybe you cut him and bring him back after week one so that as a veteran, it's not a fully guaranteed salary at that point?
I think it's the latter. I think you got it right in that it might be a job where they cut him and then bring him back eventually, because they've got a guy in Jason Verrett who likely starts the year on IR or PUP. I don't think he'll be, especially after not practicing at all so far, I just don't think he'll be ready. And even if he is ready, I think the 49ers would want to stash him, make sure he's 100%, and then bring him back when he's fully healthy. So I think he takes up a 53-man roster spot. But I also think there are a couple of other intriguing corners on the team where they could cut Dante Johnson and then bring him back. I think, honestly, Johnson could be in the line to start at slot corner if the 49ers feel highly about him, because I don't think both Johnson and Dennard should be given a roster spot given the amount of depth that they have at cornerback.
I do love the depth at cornerback, much like I love the depth at offensive line. It makes me feel secure in not knowing that one position that still feels completely undecided, that, hey, there are multiple good options that can fill in there. It's just a matter of finding which one. I feel the same about this next position at edge rusher, opposite of Nick Bosa, who obviously locks down that starting spot at edge. Is this a case where Samson Ebukam's improved performance in the second half of last season is enough for him to lock down that spot? Are you seeing enough from the rookie Drake Jackson to consider him getting in on early third downs to start the season? What are you seeing at that edge rush position opposite of Bosa?
Right. So edge is very interesting always because there are two packages. The base ones where it's run defending scenarios, and then the pass rushing ones. And they've been different. Ebukam has been the starter in every single day in the base package and in the run defending package, and deservedly so. He's one of the better run defending edges on the team. But Ebukam has not been the starter when it comes to the other package. It's instead been Charles Omenihu for a majority of the time, and they've rotated players in. I've seen Kerry Hyder get run with the ones. I'm not too ecstatic about it. I don't think he's looked that great so far. I think he's been pretty blocked when he does get there. But the name you mentioned, Drake Jackson, he has looked good. Drake Jackson has had two really good practices. The first one was Thursday, where he was consistently beating the both tackles. He worked on either side. And then on Friday, he worked in the interior with Nick Bosa. Imagine that 1-2 punch. Drake Jackson, Nick Bosa. I think that's just just a godly 1-2 duo right next to each other. Jackson got some more run today. Today was one of his better days. So he had two pressures on Thursday, I believe, including a sack with Robert Nikomdiche. And then today, he had another sack and 3 pressures today, beating Alfredo Gutierrez twice and beating Justin Schuh once on the edge.
Man, that absolutely gives me some enthusiasm to believe that not only is this position deep and stacked, but that the 49ers may have hit on a young player that could contribute for years to come. Very exciting. Want to flip over to the other side and get your quick prediction on a couple of the battles that still remain on the offensive side of it, but got to bring in those kind comments as well. NYCE 1030 saying, Rob Schuh, what a great show, great info, and Rohan, excellent job on player info, both positive and negative. Thank you, fellas, for the great Niner content. Everybody smash that like button and subscribe. Thank you, NYCE 1030. I couldn't agree more. Been a fantastic guest today, and we're going to close out with his thoughts on the offensive side of the ball and get him out of here, because you do have a show coming up, right? You do have another show you will be on today, good sir?
Yeah, I'm going to be live with Jesse Naylor of Last Second Sports. It's going to be a fun show, so be sure to subscribe to my channel, where you can see that content in a couple minutes.
That is fantastic. Let's close this one out and get you out of here to get ready for that show. A couple of the remaining camp battles, just quick thoughts. The tight end 2 position. Charlie Warner obviously had the core muscle surgery and had crept into the tight end 2 role towards the end of last season, most likely because of his blocking prowess and not his pass catching ability. But Ross Dwelley had fallen. What are you seeing from the other tight ends in that crowded room, and who do you anticipate grabs that second tight end spot in the way too early prediction?
It's a very interesting battle. I'll be honest. This is a name people don't really think of so far, but he's been the most consistent guy outside of George Kittle. George Kittle has been great, by the way, but the second guy, in my opinion, best tight end on the field outside of Kittle has been Jordan Matthews. Jordan Matthews has flashed every single day of practice, and the reason I called it intriguing is because Jordan Matthews looked like he injured his ankle today or something like that.
Right.
He had an awkward landing on a one-on-one or on a team drill type of play. Awkward landing, was seen limping. It looks like a left knee to a left ankle injury, and I did not see him out there during the scrimmage session today. Information hasn't been given out on that. Hopefully it's not long-term, because Jordan Matthews was honestly on his way to a roster spot before that injury. Now it's going to be interesting to see who that tight end 2 is, especially with Warner out.
That's unfortunate. Hopefully it is a quick recovery and he can retain that progression that he was making there. When you look at the wide receiver room, obviously with Deebo back, Brandon Ayuk out there, Juwan Jennings, it seems pretty solid at 1, 2, 3. When you look at who might statistically grab that 4th contributor spot in the wide receiver room, do you see it more likely to be Ray McCloud or Danny Gray, who contributes to this offense throughout the season?
I actually don't think it'll be close. I think McCloud will get a majority of the 4th team snaps. McCloud has seen a lot more action in training camp, and he also was a flasher in OTAs and minicamp. McCloud, though, he's just been utilized in more roles because he's more efficient in those roles. He's been used as a gadget. He originally was seen as a nice check down option. He's got a lot of check downs early in training camp, and then was used as a crosser guy while also seeing some deep action, whereas Danny Gray is somewhat of a one-trick pony. Danny Gray, in my opinion, still has a lot to go in his development because he isn't a pristine route runner. He wasn't in college. He has pure deep speed, but struggled with route running and sometimes neutralized his speed for route running. So far, Gray has failed to separate. He was guarded very well by Deommodore Lenoir on a couple of plays. I mentioned Ambry Thomas had a good rep on him, and Charvarius Ward had a good rep on him. He's had 2 catches that I've seen so far that have been good, but one of them was on third-team cornerback Kadar Holman, who won't make the team, and the second one was a very well-contested pass by Tariq Castro-Fields, where once again Gray failed to separate on a slant route. It's just he made a great catch on a pass from Brock Purdy.
Do you anticipate that Gray is the type of receiver that may need to bulk up a little bit before he can actually get off of the line against NFL press coverage?
That might be the case. He might need to a little bit just because of his lack of a release package right now, because Gray's number one talent, right? And really his only talent at the moment is his speed. And he needs to be able to utilize that speed by getting off immediately. And that might be the case to win physically at the line, because right now, as unfortunate as it sounds, Travis Benjamin was that guy last year. And at the moment, Danny Gray doesn't look that different from Travis Benjamin just in camp. And that's unfortunate because Travis Benjamin was not a great receiver last year.
Yeah, that would be a little bit of a disappointment. I know fans are excited about what Danny Gray brings to the table. Hopefully that continues to improve throughout training camp. Last one for you and let you out on this one. You already talked a little bit about the running back room, in particular, not seeing what you wanted to see from Jeff Wilson Jr., seeing a little flash from Jordan Mason. But how is that one shaking out? Do you think from top to bottom that this one is still undecided, or does Elijah Mitchell come in as the sort of unquestioned running back one and the rest of it need to shake out? What's your impression of the running back room so far?
Yeah, I agree. I think that Elijah Mitchell is a clear-cut running back one. He's taken a majority of the first team snaps. You see him whenever the top two tackles are out there. It seems like Elijah Mitchell is out there as well. As for running back number two, right now I think Trey Sermon has the hold on that position. Tyrion Davis-Price is running back number three. You haven't necessarily seen Davis-Price run much with Trey Lance. You've seen him run more with Nate Sudfeld and with the second and third unit, whereas you've seen Trey Sermon get some reps with Lance in there. He had a nice run today. And I think the one part about Sermon's development, a lot of people wondered, can he be a one-cut guy? Can he be a downhill runner? Or does he require too many cuts to try and get downfield? He has exhibited some nice one-cut runs so far in camp. I personally think he is flashing a little bit. The only issue right now with Sermon is, can he be a reliable receiver as well? He dropped a pass in one-on-ones today. He doesn't necessarily seem to have the best hands of the group. That's Jordan Mason. But right now, as my personal opinion on how the running back room is unfolding is Mitchell 1, Sermon 2, Davis-Price 3, and Jordan Mason 4.
I like that prediction. I love it. Well, I lied. There's one more question for you on the way out. Flav comes in. Seems like O-line really struggling. Are you concerned Trey's 3.37 second snap to release time, slowest in the league last year, is going to make a bad O-line worse and also result in a ton of holding calls? I will complete this sentence. Or do you think Trey's mobility will play into keeping him upright? Do you see this as a concern the way Flav is laying it out here?
Yeah, so we talked about the O-line earlier, so I'll specifically focus on Trey. I think the 3.37 second snap time is very interesting because we talked about how the 49ers might be looking to air it out a lot more, meaning more deep passes this year, which also requires holding the ball a little longer in the pocket. However, I'm not concerned because Trey Lance today, even with collapsing pockets, was able to run. And today was the first day where he was really instinctual as a runner. He had 3 or 4 undesigned scrambles today. He didn't have a designed run. He had all of his rushes were scrambles today. And one of his best plays was on one of the plays that I mentioned earlier where Kevin Givens had beaten Aaron Banks. Kevin Givens was in his face. Lance ducked the pressure, ran straight up the middle, and his speed was really on showcase today. 15-yard rushing touchdown in the red zone. So he's been looking good. I think his athleticism is there. I think his speed is better than it has been in years past. Like last year, I thought he was slow. I thought he was slower than expected in the Cardinals game and in the Texans game, but that was because he wasn't comfortable. Now he's not necessarily thinking, he's just going. He looked faster today than I've seen him, and I saw him in person in Houston too. He looked faster than I've seen him in film, and he's looked faster than I saw him in Houston last year.
Fantastic answer, and just what I wanted to hear. Flav also coming in to say, yes, I was, in fact, attempting to finish out the sentence that way, but was limited in characters. I agree with Quesadilla Thrilla. Great questions from the audience today. Just a great show
100%.
Overall. Rohan, thank you so much for coming on the program. Really enjoyed having you here with me today.
Hey, thank you, Rob. It's been a blast, and I always appreciate, obviously, your positivity, the amazing sneakerheads in the chat, and yeah, it's been a great show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Get over to his channel. The link is in the description of this video. So go down there, get over to his channel, subscribe, watch the video that is coming up now. I will be back on tomorrow between two beards at 5 p.m. Until then, cheers, faithful.